Hey guys! Tonight, we're climbing aboard a creaking ship. Not a glamorous one, not a clean one, but a real pirate vessel. The kind that smells of rotting wood and unwashed bodies, where the deck is slick with salt spray and something you'd rather not identify. This is the Golden Age of Piracy, 1718, and you're about to discover why the romantic tales of treasure and adventure couldn't be further from the truth. If you enjoy this sort of thing, maybe give the video a like and subscribe for more slow historical journeys. Drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always love hearing from you night owls and insomniacs scattered across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's drift back in time to a place where survival was never guaranteed. Comfort was a luxury you'd forgotten existed, and every single day tested the limits of human endurance. You wake in the belly of the ship, though calling it waking suggests you were truly asleep. The hammock beneath you sways with the endless motion of the sea, and the hemp rope digs into your shoulder blades through the thin, damp canvas. Your body aches from the unforgiving curve of the hammock, and you can feel every knot and strand of rope that supports you pressing into your spine. The air down here is thick and humid, heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, stagnant bilge water, and the sharp tang of tar that seeps from every beam and plank. The darkness is almost complete. Only the faintest trace of gray light filters down through the hatch above, telling you that dawn is breaking somewhere beyond the wooden walls that have become your world. You shift slightly, and the hammock rocks, the rope creaking with a sound that mingles with the dozens of other creaks, groans, and sighs that fill the lower deck. All around you, other bodies shift and breathe in their own hammocks, creating a symphony of human discomfort that never truly stops. Your clothes cling to your skin, damp with sweat and salt spray that has worked its way down through every crack and seam in the ship's construction. The fabric feels rough against your skin, stiff with salt and grime, and you realize you haven't changed these clothes in weeks. The thought of clean, dry clothing seems like a memory from another life, a luxury so distant it might as well be a fairy tale. You run your tongue across your lips and taste salt, always salt. It's in your hair, your clothes, under your fingernails, and coating the inside of your mouth. The taste never leaves you out here. It's become as much a part of you as your own skin, a constant reminder that you're surrounded by an endless expanse of water that could kill you in a dozen different ways. The ship rolls gently to port, then back to starboard, a motion that has become so familiar you barely notice it anymore. But your body notices. Your stomach clenches slightly with each roll, not from seasickness anymore. That passed weeks ago, but from the constant low-level nausea that comes from never eating enough good food, from living on rations that were questionable when they were fresh and are now something far worse. You can hear the familiar sounds that mark the beginning of another day. Footsteps on the deck above, heavy boots that make the ceiling creak and rain down small pieces of dried oakum and wood dust. Someone is coughing, a wet, rattling sound that speaks of lungs filled with too much damp air and too little good food. Another man mutters in his sleep, words you can't make out, but the tone is angry, desperate. The smell hits you as you shift again in your hammock. It's always there, but mornings seem to make it worse. The smell of men who haven't bathed in months, of clothing that has never been properly cleaned, of the bilge water that sloshes back and forth far below in the bottom of the ship. Mixed with that is the smell of the ship itself, tar, hemp rope, wet wood that's starting to rot in places, and the metallic smell of the iron fittings that hold everything together. You close your eyes and try to imagine what fresh air might smell like, but the memory is fading. How long has it been since you've smelled flowers or bread baking? or even just air that doesn't carry the salt tang of the sea. Time moves differently out here, marked not by days and weeks but by the rhythm of watches, by the slow consumption of supplies, by the gradual degradation of everything around you. Someone near you is scratching, the sound rhythmic and desperate. Lice. Everyone has them. They live in the seams of your clothes, in your hair, behind your ears. You reach up and scratch at your own scalp, feeling the familiar itch that has become as constant as breathing. Your fingernails come away with small, dark specks, some lice, some just accumulated grime that has worked its way so deep into your skin you wonder if you'll ever be clean again. The hammock next to you creaks as its occupant stirs. You can hear him breathing, shallow and labored. So many of the crew have that sound now, as if their lungs are struggling with the constant damp and the poor air down here. You listen to your own breathing and wonder if you sound the same way, if your body is slowly giving up the same way theirs are. Above you, someone calls out an order, the words muffled by the thick planking but the tone clear enough. Soon someone will come down and roust all of you from your hammocks, and another day will begin. Another day of the same routines, the same discomforts, the same grinding repetition that wears away at your soul like water wearing away stone. You shift again, trying to find a position that doesn't make your back ache quite so much, but the hammock offers no comfort. It's designed for efficiency, not rest. Just enough to keep you from sleeping on the wet deck, just enough to pack as many bodies as possible into the cramped space below decks. Comfort is not a consideration. Comfort is for people on land, people with real beds and clean sheets and rooms that don't rock back and forth every second of every day. The gray light from above grows slightly brighter, and you know your time for rest is almost over. Soon you'll have to roll out of this hammock, feel your feet hit the damp, rough planking of the deck, and begin another day of the same endless routine. The same awful food, the same backbreaking work, the same small humiliations and constant discomforts that make up life aboard this floating prison. You can hear water sloshing somewhere below, the bilge water that has to be pumped out regularly or the ship will slowly sink beneath the waves. The sound is constant, a liquid whisper that reminds you that only a few inches of wood separate you from the crushing depths of the ocean. The planks beneath you creak and flex with each wave, and you can feel the ship working, struggling against the sea that wants to claim it. Your stomach growls, but you know from experience that eating will only make you feel worse. The food that waits for you above is barely worthy of the name. Hardtack biscuits so hard you have to soak them in whatever liquid you can find just to make them edible, and even then they're often crawling with weevils. Salt pork that's more salt than pork, dried to the consistency of leather and about as appetizing. Water that tastes of the wooden barrels it's stored in, often with a green tinge that speaks of algae and worse things growing in its depths. You close your eyes and try to remember the taste of fresh bread, of fruit that wasn't dried and salted, of meat that hadn't been preserved until all flavor and nutrition had been leached away. The memories are there, but they feel like stories someone told you rather than experiences you actually lived. This ship, this constant discomfort, this slow grinding away of your humanity, this has become your reality. The man in the hammock across from you sits up suddenly, his hammock swaying wildly. He doesn't say anything, just sits there in the dim light, his head in his hands. You recognize the posture. It's the look of someone who has just remembered where he is, who has had a moment of hope that this was all a dream, only to have reality crash back down around him. You've worn that expression yourself more mornings than you care to count. He eventually swings his legs over the side of his hammock and drops to the deck, his bare feet slapping against the wet wood. He's dressed in the same rough, salt-stained clothing that all of you wear, canvas trousers that were once white but are now a dingy gray, a shirt that might have been any color originally but is now just the color of dirt and sweat and salt. He stretches, trying to work out the kinks that come from sleeping in a hammock for months on end, and you can hear his joints pop and crack. More men are stirring now, the communal awakening that happens every morning as the light grows stronger and the sounds from above become more insistent. Someone curses quietly, a long string of profanity that would make a sailor blush, but out here it's just another sound, as common as the creaking of the rigging or the splash of waves against the hull. You finally give in to the inevitable and swing your own legs over the side of your hammock. The deck beneath your feet is rough and splintery, damp with condensation and whatever moisture has worked its way down from above. The planks are uneven, some swollen with moisture, others shrunk and warped, creating a surface that's always ready to catch your toe or stub your heel. Standing upright is impossible down here. The ceiling is too low, barely 5 feet in most places, forcing you to stoop and crouch in a posture that leaves your back screaming by the end of each day. You've learned to move in a perpetual hunch, shoulders curved forward, head down, like some sort of cave-dwelling creature adapted to a life without proper headroom. The air moves sluggishly around you, stirred only by the motion of bodies and the gentle rocking of the ship. It's thick with humidity and the breath of too many men in too small a space. You take a deep breath and immediately regret it as the full cocktail of odors hits your lungs. Unwashed bodies, rotting wood, stagnant water, and something else, something sweet and cloying that might be the beginning of decay in the ship's timbers. Around you, other men are going through their own morning rituals. One man is checking his hammock for tears, running his fingers along the rope to make sure it will hold for another night. Another is scratching frantically at his arms, where red welts mark the places where lice or fleas have been feeding. A third is just sitting on the edge of his hammock, staring at nothing, his eyes empty and distant. You reach for the small bag that holds what few possessions you have left. A spare shirt that's in no better condition than the one you're wearing. A piece of sailcloth that serves as a blanket when the nights get cold. A wooden spoon, carved roughly from a piece of driftwood, that represents the height of your dining luxury. And tucked away in the bottom, wrapped carefully in a piece of oiled canvas, a small knife that serves as both tool and last resort. The knife is important not because you plan to use it as a weapon, but because it represents a tiny measure of control in a life where you control almost nothing. With it, you can trim your fingernails when they get too long and start catching on things. You can cut away pieces of rotting cloth before they spread to the rest of your clothing. You can carve your initials into the wood of your hammock, a small act of defiance that says you were here, you existed, you mattered. Someone above shouts an order, and you know your time for quiet contemplation is over. The day watch is beginning, and every man is expected to contribute his share to keeping this floating coffin moving through the water. You stuff your possessions back into their bag and prepare to climb the ladder to the upper deck, to face another day of the same grinding routine that defines your existence. But first, you pause for a moment and listen to the sounds around you. The creak of rope and wood, the whisper of water against the hull, the breathing and shifting of your crewmates. This has become the soundtrack of your life, these sounds that speak of confinement and hardship and the constant struggle against forces much larger than yourself. You think about the world above, the deck where you'll spend the next 12 hours working under a sun that will burn your skin or in rain that will soak through your clothes and leave you shivering. You think about the food that waits for you, if you can call it food. You think about the work that never ends, the constant maintenance required to keep a wooden ship functional in an environment that wants to destroy it. And you think about how long you can continue this way, how much more your body and mind can take before something breaks that can't be repaired. The thought is always there, lurking at the edge of your consciousness like a shadow that follows you everywhere. How much longer can you survive this life that barely deserves the name? The ladder leading up to the deck looms before you, its rungs worn smooth by the passage of countless feet. Each rung is stained with salt and grime, and you can feel the rough wood under your hands as you prepare to climb. The wood is never dry out here, always slightly damp with spray and humidity, and it has a texture that speaks of years of exposure to the elements. You place your foot on the bottom rung and feel it flex slightly under your weight. The ladder creaks, a sound that's somehow different from all the other creaks and groans that fill the ship. This one speaks of strain, of wood that's been asked to bear more weight than it was designed for longer than it was meant to last. As you climb, you can feel the temperature changing, the stifling heat of the lower deck giving way to something that might generously be called fresh air. But even the air on deck carries the salt tang of the sea, the smell of wet rope and tar, and the underlying odor of unwashed men working in close quarters. Your head emerges through the hatch, and you're immediately struck by the relative brightness of the early morning light. After the near darkness below, even the gray light of dawn seems almost blinding. You squint and blink, your eyes watering as they adjust to the change. The deck stretches out before you, an expanse of weathered planking that's been scrubbed and rescubbed until the wood has taken on a pale, bleached appearance. But despite all the scrubbing, despite all the efforts to keep it clean, the deck still bears the stains and scars of life at sea. Dark patches where blood has soaked into the wood, grooves worn by the constant passage of feet and the dragging of heavy objects. Places where the planking has been patched and repatched, creating a patchwork surface that tells the story of this ship's long and difficult life. You pull yourself fully onto the deck and stand, finally able to straighten your spine after the cramped conditions below. The feeling is almost luxurious, being able to stand at your full height, to stretch your arms above your head without hitting the ceiling. But the luxury is temporary. Within minutes, you'll be bent over some task or another, your back curved in the familiar posture of constant labor. The morning air is cool against your skin, carrying with it the endless moisture of the sea. Everything is damp out here, always damp. The ropes, the sails, the deck, your clothes, nothing ever truly dries. The salt air sees to that, working its way into every fiber and surface, keeping everything in a state of perpetual dampness that breeds rot and decay. You look around at your crewmates as they emerge from below, each one bearing the same marks of this life. Skin burned dark by the sun and crusted with salt. Hair that's matted and unkempt, often tied back with whatever piece of string or rope they can find. Clothes that hang on frames grown thin from poor food and hard work. Eyes that have seen too much and expressed too little, dulled by the constant repetition of hardship. The ship rocks gently beneath your feet, a motion that has become so familiar you barely notice it anymore. But your body notices. Your muscles are constantly making tiny adjustments, keeping you balanced as the deck tilts and rolls beneath you. It's exhausting in a way that's hard to describe, this constant low-level effort required just to remain upright, just to function in an environment that's never still. Above you, the rigging stretches up into the morning sky, a complex web of ropes and cables that supports the sails and allows the ship to harness the wind. But from where you stand, it looks more like a trap than a tool, a maze of lines that could easily tangle around an unwary sailor and drag him to his death. You've seen it happen, watched as men lost their footing on the yards and fell, sometimes into the sea, sometimes onto the deck with a sound that haunts your dreams. The first mate appears from the stern of the ship, his heavy boots making the deck vibrate as he walks. He's a large man, made larger by the authority he carries, and his presence immediately changes the atmosphere on deck. Conversations stop. Men move more quickly, with more purpose. The casual, sluggish movement of men barely awake is replaced by the focused energy of men who know they're being watched. He calls out orders in a voice that carries easily over the sound of wind and waves, and you know that your day has officially begun. The next 12 hours will be filled with the same tasks you've performed countless times before: hauling on lines, scrubbing decks, mending sails, checking rigging. Work that's both backbreaking and mind-numbing, requiring just enough attention to keep you from making fatal mistakes but not enough to keep your mind occupied. You move toward your assigned station, feeling the rough planking beneath your bare feet. Shoes are a luxury that few can afford out here, and even if you had them, they would quickly rot away in the constant dampness. So you go barefoot, feeling every splinter and nailhead, every variation in the deck's surface. Your feet have become tough and calloused, adapted to this harsh environment, but they're also constantly vulnerable to injury from the countless hazards that litter the deck. The morning routine begins with checking the rigging, examining every line and cable for signs of wear or damage. The ropes are your lifeline out here, the only thing that allows you to control the massive forces of wind and sea that drive the ship. But rope is organic, subject to rot and decay just like everything else in this environment. It stretches and shrinks with changes in humidity, weakens under the constant stress of use, and can fail without warning if not carefully maintained. You run your hands along a thick hemp line, feeling for the telltale softness that indicates internal rot, the slight fuzziness that suggests the fibers are beginning to separate. The rope is rough against your palms, coated with tar to help protect it from the elements, but the tar can't prevent the slow degradation that affects everything exposed to the sea. The work is methodical, requiring attention but not thought. Your hands know what to look for, your eyes know what to see. You've done this same inspection hundreds of times before, and you'll do it hundreds of times more if you survive that long. The repetition is both comforting and maddening. Comforting because it requires no decisions, no complex thoughts, but maddening because it offers no stimulation, no variation, no sense of progress or achievement. As you work, you become aware of the sounds around you. The creaking of the ship as it works through the swells, a constant symphony of wood and rope under stress. The snap of canvas as the sails fill and empty with each gust of wind. The splash of water against the hull, sometimes gentle, sometimes more forceful as a larger wave strikes the bow. And underneath all of this, the human sounds. Men breathing heavily as they work. Occasional curses when someone catches a finger in a block or stumbles on the uneven deck. The wet coughing that seems to plague half the crew. A sound that speaks of lungs damaged by too much salt air and too little good food. Your stomach reminds you that you haven't eaten, cramping slightly with hunger. But you know from experience that eating won't necessarily make you feel better. The food available to you is barely adequate to keep you alive, let alone healthy or satisfied. The hardtack biscuits are often so infested with weevils that they move on their own. The salt pork is more salt than meat, preserved to the point where it's lost any resemblance to food. And the water, if you can call it that, tastes of the wooden barrels where it's stored, often with a green tinge that suggests the presence of algae or worse. But you eat anyway, because the alternative is starvation, and you need whatever energy you can get for the long day ahead. You make your way to where the morning rations are being distributed, joining the line of men who wait with the same resigned patience that marks all their interactions with the ship's routine. The cook, if he deserves the title, ladles out portions with mechanical precision. A piece of hardtack, hard as a stone and about as appetizing. A strip of salt pork, more gristle than meat. A dipper of water that tastes of wood and worse things. This is breakfast, the meal that's supposed to fuel you for the morning's work. You find a place to sit on a coil of rope and examine your meal. The hardtack is gray-brown, with small holes that might be air pockets or might be the work of insects. You tap it against the deck and hear the solid thunk of something that could serve as a weapon if necessary. The salt pork is dark and shiny with grease, its surface crusted with crystalline deposits of salt. You dip the hardtack in your water, hoping to soften it enough to chew without breaking your teeth. The water immediately takes on a cloudy appearance as the biscuit begins to dissolve, releasing whatever flour and additives went into its original creation, along with whatever insects or larvae have taken up residence since then. As you wait for the hardtack to soften, you look around at your crewmates. They're all engaged in the same process, trying to make the unmakeable edible, to extract some nutrition from substances that barely qualify as food. Some soak their biscuits in rum, when they can get it, claiming that the alcohol kills whatever might be living in the bread. Others eat the weevils deliberately, arguing that they're probably the most nutritious part of the meal. The conversations are muted, practical. Discussions of weather, of the ship's heading, of small repairs that need to be made. No one talks about home anymore, or about dreams for the future. Those topics are too painful, too likely to remind everyone of what they've lost and may never regain. Instead, the talk is focused on the immediate, the concrete, the problems that can be solved with rope and tar and hard work. You bite into your softened hardtack and immediately regret it. Despite the soaking, it's still tough enough to make your jaws ache, and the taste is flat and stale, with an underlying bitterness that speaks of flour that was probably questionable when it was first milled. You force yourself to chew and swallow, knowing that your body needs whatever calories you can extract from this miserable substance. The salt pork is no better. It's been preserved so thoroughly that all moisture and most flavor have been leached away, leaving something that has the texture of leather and a taste that's more salt than anything else. You gnaw at it methodically, working to tear off small pieces that you can actually swallow, trying not to think about what the meat might have been before it underwent this transformation. The water helps wash it all down, but barely. It has its own unpleasant taste, a combination of the wood from the storage barrels and whatever organisms have been growing in the darkness of the ship's hold. You drink it anyway, because dehydration is a constant threat out here, where the sun and salt air leach moisture from your body faster than you can replace it. As you eat, you become aware of the routine happening around you. Men finishing their meager meals and moving to their assigned tasks. The ship's routine is precise and unchanging, driven by the necessity of keeping a complex machine functional in a hostile environment. Every task has its place, every man has his role, and deviation from the routine is not tolerated. You finish what you can of your breakfast and make your way to where the day's first major task is beginning. The deck needs to be scrubbed, a job that happens every morning and accomplishes very little beyond keeping the crew busy. The planking is permanently stained with salt and tar and worse things, and no amount of scrubbing will ever make it truly clean. But the work continues anyway, because idle hands lead to idle thoughts, and idle thoughts lead to problems that no one wants to deal with. You take your place in the line of men working their way across the deck with brushes and buckets of seawater. The brush in your hands is rough and worn, its bristles flattened by months of use against the hard wood of the deck. The water is cold and salty, and within minutes your hands are red and chapped from the constant immersion. The work is repetitive and mindless. Dip the brush, scrub a section of planking, move forward, repeat. The motion quickly becomes automatic, allowing your mind to wander even as your body continues the familiar routine. But where can your mind go out here? There are no pleasant memories that don't hurt to recall, no dreams for the future that don't seem impossible from your current position. So you focus on the immediate sensations. The rough texture of the brush against your palms. The cold bite of the seawater as it splashes onto your already damp clothes. The ache in your back as you bend over the deck, scrubbing at stains that will never come clean. The burn in your shoulders as you repeat the same motion over and over, wearing grooves in your muscles that match the grooves worn in the ship's deck. The sun climbs higher in the sky, and you can feel its heat beginning to penetrate the morning coolness. Out here, with no shade except what the sails provide, the sun becomes both blessing and curse. Welcome warmth when the nights are cold and damp, but brutal punishment during the long days when there's no escape from its rays. Your skin has long since adapted to the constant exposure, burned dark and tough as leather. But the sun still takes its toll, drawing moisture from your body, making your head throb if you don't drink enough water, creating a fatigue that goes beyond simple tiredness. It's the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from having your body's resources constantly depleted and inadequately replaced. The scrubbing continues, the line of men moving steadily across the deck like some sort of human machine. Occasionally, someone straightens up to stretch his back or wipe sweat from his eyes, but the work never really stops. The mate keeps watch, ensuring that the pace doesn't slacken, that no one takes too long a break from the mindless labor. You reach a section of deck near the bow where the planking is particularly stained and scarred. This is where the serious work of the ship happens, where heavy objects are moved and dropped, where blood has been spilled and inadequately cleaned up. The stains here are permanent, worked so deep into the wood that they've become part of its character. You scrub at these stains knowing they won't come clean, but scrubbing anyway because that's what's expected. The futility of the effort is somehow representative of everything about this life. Constant work that accomplishes little, endless repetition of tasks that serve no real purpose except to keep everyone busy and under control. The morning wears on, marked not by clocks but by the position of the sun and the rhythm of the ship's routine. The scrubbing gives way to other tasks, checking the rigging, adjusting the sails, performing the countless small maintenance jobs that keep a wooden ship functional. Each task flows into the next with mechanical precision, leaving no time for rest or contemplation. You find yourself assigned to working on a section of rigging that's showing signs of wear. The rope is hemp, thick and rough, coated with tar to protect it from the elements. But the tar can't prevent the slow degradation that affects everything exposed to salt water and constant stress. You examine each strand carefully, looking for the telltale signs of weakness that could lead to catastrophic failure. The work requires concentration, but not the kind that engages your mind in any meaningful way. It's the concentration of avoiding mistakes, of not missing signs of damage that could endanger the ship and everyone on it. Your hands know what to look for, your eyes know what to see, but your mind remains largely unengaged, free to wander in the limited territory of thoughts that don't hurt too much to explore. You think about the rope itself, about the hemp plants that grew in some distant field, tended by farmers who probably never imagined their crop would end up here, keeping a pirate ship afloat in dangerous waters. You think about the hands that twisted the fibers into strands, the strands into rope, the rope that now supports your life in ways both literal and metaphorical. The rope is rough against your palms, its surface irregular with knots and splices. Every few feet, there's a splice where two lengths have been joined together, creating a thicker section that's both stronger and more vulnerable than the surrounding rope. You examine each splice carefully, feeling for the give that indicates the joint is beginning to fail. As you work, you become aware of the sounds of the ship around you. The constant creaking of wood under stress, a sound that never stops and that you've learned to interpret like a language. Different creaks mean different things. The normal working of the ship through the swells, the strain of rigging under load, the more urgent sounds that indicate something is wrong and needs immediate attention. The wind has picked up slightly, and you can hear it singing through the rigging above your head. It's a sound that might be beautiful in other circumstances, but out here it represents work and danger. More wind means the sails need constant adjustment, means the rigging is under greater stress, means the chance of something going wrong increases with every gust. You look up at the sails, great sheets of canvas that billow and snap with each change in the wind's direction. The sailcloth is patched and repatched, a patchwork of different materials and colors that tells the story of countless repairs. Some patches are neat and professional, sewn with careful stitches that blend into the original fabric. Others are rough and temporary, hasty repairs made in difficult conditions with whatever materials were available. The sails are the ship's engine, the means by which it harnesses the wind to push through the water. But they're also fragile, subject to tearing and wearing in ways that can leave the ship helpless in dangerous waters. Every storm brings new damage, every strong wind threatens to shred the careful patchwork that keeps the ship moving. You return your attention to the rope in your hands, running your fingers along its length to check for weak spots. The hemp fibers are beginning to separate in one section, creating a soft spot that will only get worse with time and stress. You make a mental note to report it to the mate when your shift ends, knowing that this section will need to be replaced before it fails and potentially takes someone with it. The work continues, methodical and repetitive. Your hands perform the familiar motions while your mind drifts, constrained by the limited range of thoughts that don't bring pain or despair. You think about the technical aspects of your work, about knots and splices and the properties of different types of rope. It's safe territory, knowledge that's useful and doesn't remind you of everything you've lost. But even these thoughts eventually circle back to your current situation. The rope you're inspecting will only last so long before it needs to be replaced. But there's no guarantee that replacement rope will be available when it's needed. Like everything else on the ship, rope is a finite resource, consumed by the constant demands of keeping the vessel functional. You think about what happens when things run out: rope, food, water, the human capacity to endure. These thoughts come whether you want them or not, like water seeping through the hull despite all efforts to keep it out. They remind you that this situation can't continue indefinitely, that something will eventually give way. The sun continues its climb across the sky, and you can feel the heat building on your back and shoulders. Your shirt, already damp with sweat and salt spray, begins to cling more tightly to your skin. The fabric is rough and salt-stained, irritating your skin with every movement. But changing clothes isn't an option. You have only one spare shirt, and it's in no better condition than the one you're wearing. You pause in your work to wipe sweat from your eyes, tasting salt as it runs down your face. The sweat stings in the small cuts and abrasions that cover your hands, reminders of the countless ways that life aboard ship can injure you. Every surface is rough, every tool is worn and potentially dangerous, every movement carries the risk of cuts, splinters, and worse injuries. Looking around at your crewmates, you see the same marks of this life written on every face and body. Scars from rope burns, from flying splinters, from the sharp edges that are everywhere on a ship. Skin that's been burned by the sun until it's tough as leather. Eyes that squint constantly against the glare of sun on water, creating deep lines that make every man look older than his years. The morning routine continues with mechanical precision, each task flowing into the next without pause or variation. You move from checking rigging to adjusting sails, from adjusting sails to performing maintenance on the ship's equipment, from maintenance to the countless small tasks that keep a wooden vessel functional in an environment that wants to destroy it. Each task requires attention but not thought, concentration but not engagement. Your body goes through the familiar motions while your mind remains largely unoccupied, free to notice the small discomforts and irritations that make up so much of your daily experience. The chafe of rough clothing against skin, the ache in muscles that are never fully rested, the constant low-level hunger that comes from never eating enough good food. The ship rocks gently through the swells, and you feel the familiar adjustment your body makes to maintain balance. It's become so automatic that you barely notice it, but it represents a constant low-level effort that adds to your fatigue. Your muscles are always working, always making tiny corrections, never truly at rest even when you're trying to sleep. You think about what it would feel like to stand on solid ground again, to feel the earth steady and unmoving beneath your feet. The memory seems almost mythical now, like a story from childhood rather than something you actually experienced. This rocking, unstable deck has become your world, and you wonder if you would even remember how to walk on land that doesn't move. The routine of maintenance continues, taking you from one section of the ship to another, from one familiar task to the next. You oil wooden blocks to keep them running smoothly, splice frayed rope ends to prevent further deterioration, check the countless fittings and fixtures that hold the ship together. Each task is small and seemingly insignificant, but together they represent the constant battle against entropy that defines life at sea. You kneel on the rough deck to examine a section of planking near the rail, looking for signs of rot or damage. The wood here is constantly soaked with spray, and you can see where the salt water has begun to work its way into the grain, creating dark stains that speak of slow decay. You probe gently with your knife, feeling for the soft spots that indicate the wood is beginning to fail. The planking gives slightly under pressure in one spot, and you know this section will need attention soon. But like so many problems on the ship, it's not urgent enough to address immediately, not serious enough to take priority over the dozens of other issues that compete for attention and materials. So you make a mental note and move on, adding another item to the endless list of things that need to be done when time and resources allow. The morning sun climbs higher, and the heat begins to build in earnest. You can feel it pressing down on your back and shoulders, drawing moisture from your already dehydrated body. Your clothes, never truly dry, begin to feel heavier as they absorb more sweat and salt spray. The fabric chafes against your skin with each movement, creating small irritations that will worsen throughout the day. You straighten up from your examination of the planking and feel your back crack as the vertebrae realign themselves. The constant bending and stooping required by your work has left its mark on your spine, creating aches and stiffness that never fully go away. You stretch as much as your surroundings allow, trying to relieve some of the tension, but you know it will return within minutes once you resume your tasks. The mate calls out orders for adjusting the sails, and you join the group of men hauling on the sheets. The rope is rough and thick in your hands, its fibers working their way into the calluses that cover your palms. The weight of the sail creates enormous tension in the line, and it takes the combined strength of several men to make even small adjustments. You lean back against the rope, feeling it dig into your shoulder as you add your weight to the effort. The line creaks and stretches under the load, and you can feel the power of the wind transmitted through the rope to your hands and body. It's a reminder of the forces you're working with, forces that could easily kill you if you make a mistake or lose your grip at the wrong moment. The sail finally moves to its new position, and you can see the immediate effect as the ship's speed increases slightly. The bow cuts through the water with a bit more authority, and the wake behind the stern grows more pronounced. These small adjustments are constant, responding to changes in wind direction and strength, trying to extract maximum efficiency from the limited power available. But efficiency is relative out here. Even under the best conditions, progress is slow and uncertain. The wind can die without warning, leaving you becalmed for days or weeks. It can increase to dangerous levels, forcing you to reduce sail and ride out conditions that threaten to tear the ship apart. You're always at the mercy of forces beyond your control, always dependent on conditions that can change in minutes. You coil the excess rope carefully, making sure each loop lies flat and even. Proper coiling is essential. Tangled rope can mean the difference between life and death when quick adjustments are needed. You've seen what happens when lines snag or knot at critical moments, watched men struggle with fouled rigging while the ship wallows helplessly in dangerous seas. The coiling is another of those repetitive tasks that requires attention but not thought. Your hands know the proper motions, the right tension to maintain, the way to lay each loop so that the rope will run freely when needed. It's muscle memory built through countless repetitions, knowledge written into your body through months of practice. As you work, you listen to the sounds around you. The constant creaking of the ship's structure, the whisper of water along the hull, the snap and flutter of canvas as the sails adjust to each gust of wind. These sounds have become the soundtrack of your existence, as familiar as your own heartbeat and just as constant. But today there's something else, a subtle change in the rhythm that catches your attention. One of the stays is singing a slightly different note as the wind passes through it, suggesting that its tension has changed. You look up at the rigging, trying to spot the source of the variation, knowing that small changes often herald larger problems. The rigging above your head is a complex web of rope and cable, each line serving a specific purpose in controlling the sails and supporting the masts. But it's also a maze of potential failure points, places where a single broken line can cascade into a disaster that could disable or destroy the ship. Every sailor learns to read the rigging like a book, to interpret its sounds and movements for signs of trouble. You spot the problem. A block that's not running smoothly, causing one of the sheets to chafe against its housing. It's a small issue now, but one that will worsen quickly if not addressed. The constant friction will weaken the rope and could eventually cause it to part under load. You point it out to another sailor, and together you begin the process of working the problem. Fixing the block requires rigging a temporary bypass, allowing you to remove the faulty hardware while maintaining control of the sail. It's delicate work, requiring coordination between multiple crew members and careful attention to the loads and forces involved. One mistake could result in losing control of the sail, with potentially catastrophic consequences. You work methodically, following procedures that have been refined through years of experience and occasional disaster. Every step is deliberate, every action checked and double-checked before implementation. The stakes are too high for casual mistakes, and everyone involved understands that their lives depend on getting it right. The faulty block comes free with a grinding sound that speaks of worn bearings and insufficient lubrication. You examine it closely, noting the metal surfaces that have been scored by salt and friction, the wooden housing that's beginning to split from repeated stress. It's another piece of equipment that's slowly wearing out, gradually becoming less reliable as the harsh conditions take their toll. But replacement parts are limited, and this block isn't quite bad enough to justify using one of the precious spares. Instead, you clean it as best you can, apply what little oil is available, and reinstall it with the knowledge that it will need attention again soon. It's a temporary solution to a permanent problem, but temporary solutions are often all that's available out here. The repair takes most of the morning, requiring patience and skill but offering little satisfaction upon completion. The block works better than it did, but not as well as it should. The sail is properly controlled, but the system is a little less reliable than before. It's progress of a sort, but progress measured in degrees of deterioration rather than actual improvement. With the repair complete, you move on to other tasks. The ship's routine continues without pause, a relentless cycle of maintenance and adjustment that never really ends. There's always something that needs attention, always some small problem that threatens to become a larger one if ignored. The work is never finished because the conditions that create problems never cease. You find yourself assigned to helping with the midday meal preparation, though calling it preparation is generous. The process involves little more than distributing the same unappetizing rations that make up every meal: hardtack, salt pork, and water that tastes of the wooden barrels where it's stored. The cook, a man who seems to take pride in making barely edible food even less appetizing, ladles out portions with mechanical precision. He's long since given up any pretense that what he's serving could be considered cuisine. His job is to distribute calories, not to provide satisfaction or nutrition, and he performs that job with grim efficiency. You take your portion and find a place to sit on a coil of rope, examining what passes for your midday meal. The hardtack is the same gray-brown color as always, hard enough to use as a hammer and about as flavorful. The salt pork glistens with grease and crystalline deposits of salt, its surface cured to an almost leather-like texture. You begin the familiar ritual of trying to make the food edible, soaking the hardtack in your water to soften it, cutting the salt pork into small pieces that you might actually be able to chew and swallow. The process is automatic now, performed without thought or hope of improvement. As you eat, you listen to the conversations around you. The talk is subdued, practical, focused on the immediate concerns of keeping the ship functional and themselves alive. No one discusses dreams or plans for the future. Those topics are too painful, too likely to remind everyone of what they've lost and may never regain. Instead, the conversations center on technical matters. The condition of various pieces of equipment, the weather patterns they've observed, the small adjustments and repairs that might improve their situation marginally. It's the talk of men who have learned to find meaning in small things, who have narrowed their focus to the immediate and achievable. You chew your way through the hardtack, feeling it scrape against your teeth and gums. Despite the soaking, it retains enough hardness to make eating it an ordeal. The taste is flat and stale, with undertones that suggest the flour was questionable when it was first milled and has only gotten worse with age and exposure to dampness. The salt pork is no improvement. The preservation process has driven out all moisture and most flavor, leaving something that requires serious effort to chew and offers little satisfaction when finally swallowed. You work at it methodically, knowing that your body needs whatever nutrition you can extract from these poor materials. The water helps wash everything down, but it carries its own unpleasant flavors. The wooden barrels where it's stored impart a musty taste, and you can see small particles floating in the liquid that you prefer not to examine too closely. But dehydration is a constant threat in this environment, so you drink it anyway, trying not to think about its quality or origin. Around you, other men are engaged in the same struggle, trying to extract sustenance from substances that barely qualify as food. Some have given up any pretense of enjoyment, wolfing down their rations as quickly as possible to get the ordeal over with. Others eat slowly and methodically, trying to make the meager portions last as long as possible. The conversation gradually dies away as everyone focuses on the challenging task of eating. The only sounds are the mechanical motions of chewing and swallowing, punctuated by occasional curses when someone encounters a particularly hard piece of hardtack or especially unpalatable bit of salt pork. You finish what you can of your meal and sit back against the rigging, feeling the rough rope press into your back. The food sits heavily in your stomach, providing calories but little satisfaction. You know you'll be hungry again within hours, but the next meal will be identical to this one, and the one after that, and the one after that, stretching into an endless future of barely adequate nutrition. The midday sun beats down on the deck, and you can feel the heat building in the wooden planking beneath you. The tar between the boards becomes soft and sticky, giving off a sharp smell that mingles with the other odors that define life aboard ship. Your clothes, already damp with sweat and spray, begin to feel oppressive as the temperature rises. You look around at your crewmates and see the effects of this life written on every face. Skin that's been burned dark by constant exposure to sun and salt air. Eyes that squint perpetually against the glare of light reflecting off the water. Hair that's been bleached and dried by the elements until it has the texture of old rope. Everyone moves with the careful economy of motion that comes from working in cramped spaces and dangerous conditions. No gesture is wasted, no movement made without purpose. It's an adaptation to an environment where carelessness can be fatal, where every action must be considered for its potential consequences. The afternoon routine begins with the familiar call to stations, and you rise from your brief rest to take up the next set of tasks. The work never really stops, it just changes form, moving from one type of maintenance to another, from one area of the ship to the next. The cycle is endless, driven by the constant deterioration that affects everything exposed to the marine environment. You're assigned to work aloft, climbing the rigging to inspect and maintain the upper reaches of the ship's sail plan. The prospect fills you with the familiar mixture of resignation and apprehension that accompanies all dangerous work. The rigging is your highway to the upper reaches of the ship, but it's also a potential death trap for the unwary or unlucky. You begin the climb, feeling the rough rope beneath your hands and feet. The hemp is coarse and prickly, working its way into the calluses that cover your palms and fingers. Each handhold must be tested, each foothold carefully chosen, because a single mistake could send you plummeting to the deck or into the sea. As you climb higher, the motion of the ship becomes more pronounced. What feels like gentle rolling on deck becomes a wild swinging motion aloft, as the height amplifies every movement of the hull below. You time your movements to the ship's rhythm, moving when the motion is relatively stable, holding tight when the swinging becomes too extreme. The view from the rigging provides a different perspective on your floating world. From here, you can see the full extent of the deck below, the tiny figures of your crewmates going about their tasks. You can see the ship's wake stretching out behind, marking your slow progress across the vast expanse of ocean that surrounds you in all directions. But the view also emphasizes your isolation. In every direction, water stretches to the horizon, broken only by the occasional whitecap or patch of different colored water. There's no sign of land, no indication of other ships, nothing to suggest that any other world exists beyond this small collection of wood and rope and canvas that has become your universe. You reach your assigned position and begin the careful inspection of the sail and rigging. The canvas is patched and repatched, a patchwork of different materials and repair techniques that tells the story of countless encounters with wind and weather. Some patches are neat and professional, sewn with careful stitches that blend into the original fabric. Others are rough and hasty, emergency repairs made in difficult conditions. You run your hands along the edge of the sail, feeling for the weak spots and worn areas that could lead to tears. The canvas is coarse and stiff, treated with various substances to make it more weather resistant, but nothing can completely protect it from the constant stress of wind and sun and salt spray. The rigging itself requires equal attention. Each line must be checked for chafe and wear, each block examined for proper operation. The forces involved are enormous. The wind pressing against hundreds of square feet of canvas creates tensions that strain every component of the system. Failure of any single element can cascade into disaster. You work methodically, moving from one component to the next, checking and testing and making small adjustments. The work requires concentration and care, but it's also repetitive and familiar. Your hands know what to look for, your eyes know what to see. The knowledge has been built through months of practice and the occasional harsh lesson when mistakes were made. The wind shifts slightly, and you feel the sail's behavior change as it adjusts to the new angle. The canvas fills more completely, and the rigging takes on new stresses as the forces redistribute themselves throughout the system. You pause in your work to observe these changes, noting how each component responds to the altered conditions. From your elevated position, you can see the effects of the wind shift on the water around the ship. The wave patterns change subtly, and the ship's speed increases slightly as the sails find a more efficient angle to the wind. These are the small victories that break up the monotony of life at sea, moments when everything works together to extract a bit more performance from the limited resources available. But you also know how quickly conditions can change, how a gentle breeze can become a howling gale with little warning. The rigging that seems so solid and reliable now could be strained to its breaking point within hours if the weather deteriorates. Every sailor learns to read the signs, to watch for the subtle changes that herald approaching trouble. You complete your inspection and begin the careful descent to the deck. The climb down is always more treacherous than the climb up, as gravity works against you and the ship's motion seems more pronounced. You move slowly and deliberately, testing each handhold, never trusting your full weight to any single piece of rigging. Back on deck, you report your findings to the mate. A few areas that need attention, but nothing immediately critical. It's the usual mixture of small problems that defines the ship's condition, issues that need to be addressed but don't require immediate action. The list of things to be done grows longer while the resources to address them remain constant. The afternoon wears on with more of the same routine maintenance that fills every day. You move from task to task, from one area of the ship to another, performing the countless small jobs that keep a wooden vessel functional in an environment that wants to destroy it. Each task is familiar, requiring skill but not thought, attention but not engagement. You oil wooden blocks to keep them running smoothly, their metal bearings protected from the corrosive effects of salt air. You splice rope ends to prevent unraveling, working the fibers back into themselves to create joints that are stronger than the original line. You check the countless fittings and fixtures that hold everything together, looking for the signs of wear and corrosion that could lead to failure. The work is never ending because the conditions that create problems never cease. Salt air corrodes metal, sun and rain weaken wood, constant motion loosens fastenings and wears away materials. Every day brings new damage, new problems to solve with limited resources and improvised solutions. As the afternoon progresses, you find yourself thinking about the passage of time and how differently it moves out here. On land, time is marked by familiar rhythms, sunrise and sunset, the changing seasons, the weekly cycle of work and rest. But at sea, time becomes fluid, marked only by the ship's routine and the slow consumption of supplies. Days blend into weeks, weeks into months, until you lose track of how long you've been aboard this floating prison. The routine is so constant, so unchanging, that it seems like time has stopped altogether. Only the gradual deterioration of equipment and supplies marks any real progress, a countdown towards some undefined endpoint when something will finally give way. You think about what that endpoint might be. Perhaps the ship will simply fall apart, its structure finally succumbing to the constant stress and neglect. Perhaps the supplies will run out, leaving everyone to face starvation or thirst. Perhaps disease will sweep through the crew, as it has on other ships, leaving too few healthy men to keep the vessel functional. These thoughts come unbidden, rising from the part of your mind that tries to prepare for every possibility. They're not pleasant thoughts, but they're realistic ones, based on the evidence of your daily experience. Everything around you is slowly deteriorating, gradually becoming less reliable and more dangerous. The sun begins its descent toward the horizon, and you know the day watch is drawing to a close. Soon it will be time for the evening meal, another encounter with the same unappetizing food that defines every meal. After that, there might be a few hours of relative rest before the night watch begins and the cycle starts over again. You look around at your crewmates, seeing the same exhaustion and resignation that you feel written on every face. They move with the mechanical precision of men who have learned to function despite constant discomfort, who have adapted to conditions that would have seemed impossible to endure just months ago. But adaptation has its limits. You can see signs of those limits in the faces around you. The hollow eyes that speak of poor nutrition and insufficient rest. The careful movements that indicate bodies pushed beyond their normal capabilities. The silence that suggests minds retreating from a reality too harsh to fully acknowledge. The evening meal call comes as the sun touches the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that might be beautiful in other circumstances. But out here, the sunset simply marks another day survived, another 24 hours closer to whatever end awaits this voyage and everyone aboard. You join the familiar line for rations, taking your place among men who have long since given up any pretense of enthusiasm for the process. The food will be the same as always, hardtack, salt pork, and questionable water, but eating it is necessary for survival. So the ritual continues. The cook distributes portions with the same mechanical efficiency he's shown at every meal, his expression blank and distant. He's given up trying to make the food appetizing and has settled for simply ensuring that everyone gets their allotted share of calories. It's sustenance in the most basic sense, fuel for bodies that are slowly wearing away despite all efforts to maintain them. You take your portion and find a place to sit, beginning once again the familiar process of trying to make barely edible food actually consumable. The hardtack requires soaking to soften it enough to chew without breaking teeth. The salt pork needs to be cut into small pieces that might actually be swallowed. The water needs to be consumed despite its questionable taste and appearance. As you eat, you listen to the evening sounds of the ship. The rigging creaks differently in the cooler air, the wood settling and adjusting as the temperature drops. The waves sound different too, their rhythm unchanged but their tones somehow altered by the approaching darkness. Night at sea brings its own challenges and discomforts. The temperature drops, making clothes that are perpetually damp even more uncomfortable. The darkness makes every task more difficult and dangerous, requiring careful movement and constant attention to avoid accidents. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful and interrupted, disturbed by the ship's motion and the need to respond to changing conditions. You finish what you can of your meal and prepare for the evening routine. Soon you'll return to your hammock in the cramped, damp space below decks, where you'll try to find rest despite the constant motion, the pervasive dampness, and the sounds of too many men living in too small a space. But before that, there are the final tasks of the day watch: securing loose items, checking the rigging one more time, ensuring that everything is ready for the potentially rougher conditions that night often brings. The work continues even as daylight fades, because the sea never sleeps and neither can those who sail upon it. You move through these final tasks with the same mechanical precision that marks all your actions, your body performing familiar motions while your mind prepares for another night of inadequate rest. Tomorrow will bring the same routine, the same hardships, the same gradual erosion of equipment and human endurance. As the last light fades from the western sky, you make your way toward the hatch that leads below decks. The prospect of your hammock, uncomfortable as it is, represents the closest thing to rest that your life provides. In a few hours, you'll begin another day identical to this one, and the one before it, and all the days stretching back to when this voyage began. The stars begin to appear overhead, brilliant points of light in the clear air far from any land-based illumination. They're beautiful in their way, but they also emphasize your isolation, your tiny size in the vast expanse of ocean that surrounds you. They remind you that you're far from any help, dependent entirely on this collection of wood and rope and canvas to keep you alive. You climb down the ladder into the familiar darkness of the lower deck, feeling the temperature rise as you descend into the cramped space where the crew sleeps. The air is thick with humidity and the breath of too many men, heavy with the odors that define life in close quarters. But it's shelter of a sort, protection from the elements and a place to rest your weary body. Your hammock awaits, strung between the beams like all the others, a simple cradle of rope and canvas that represents your only private space in this communal existence. You settle into it carefully, feeling it conform to your body's shape, supporting your weight while allowing the ship's motion to rock you gently back and forth. Around you, other men are going through their own evening routines, preparing for another night of fitful sleep interrupted by watches and changing conditions. The sounds are familiar: shifting bodies, creaking rope, the quiet murmur of voices discussing the day's events and tomorrow's challenges. You close your eyes and try to let the ship's motion lull you towards sleep, despite the discomfort of the hammock and the constant background noise of men living in too close quarters. Your body is exhausted from another day of hard labor, but your mind remains active, processing the experiences and concerns that define this harsh existence. Sleep, when it finally comes, brings little real rest. Your dreams are filled with the sounds and sensations of shipboard life, the creak of rigging, the splash of waves, the constant motion that never stops. Even in sleep, you remain part of this floating world, this collection of wood and rope and human endurance slowly making its way across an indifferent sea. The night passes in fragments of rest interrupted by the needs of the ship and crew. Voices call out orders in the darkness above, feet move across the deck, the rigging sings its endless song of stress and strain. You drift in and out of consciousness, never fully asleep but never completely awake, caught in the twilight state that passes for rest in this demanding environment. And through it all, the ship continues its slow progress across the water, carrying its cargo of increasingly desperate men toward whatever fate awaits them. The wood creaks and works under the constant stress, the sails strain against their rigging, the hull pushes through waves that could overwhelm it without warning. Dawn comes too soon, announced not by any clock or bell, but by the gradual lightening of the gray square of sky visible through the hatch above. You've been drifting in and out of consciousness for what feels like minutes but must have been hours, your body never finding true rest in the swaying hammock. The hemp rope has worked its way into your muscles, leaving impressions that ache with each movement. The familiar sounds of morning begin around you, men coughing, the wet rattling sound that speaks of lungs struggling with the constant damp. Someone nearby is scratching again, the rhythmic sound of fingernails against skin, trying to find relief from the insects that share your living space. Another man mutters prayers in a language you don't recognize, perhaps hoping that today will somehow be different from yesterday. You shift in your hammock and feel the accumulated dampness in your clothes, moisture that has seeped in from the air, from the condensation that forms on every surface, from your own sweat as you tossed and turned through the night. The fabric clings to your skin with an unpleasant stickiness, salt crystals forming in the creases where the material has dried and redampened repeatedly. Your mouth tastes of salt and something metallic, perhaps blood from where you've bitten your cheek in your sleep, or maybe just the taste that comes from breathing air that's never truly fresh. Your tongue feels thick and dry despite the constant humidity, and you realize you're desperately thirsty, though you know the water that awaits you will do little to satisfy that thirst. The sounds from above grow more insistent, boots on the deck, voices calling out orders, the creak of rigging being adjusted. You know that soon someone will come down to rouse those who aren't already stirring, and another day identical to the last will begin. The thought brings no anticipation, no curiosity about what the day might hold, only a weary resignation to the routine that has become your entire existence. You swing your legs over the side of the hammock and feel your feet touch the damp planking below. The wood is rough and uneven, swollen in some places from moisture, shrunken and warped in others. Your bare feet have grown tough and calloused from months of contact with these harsh surfaces, but they still feel every splinter, every nail head, every irregularity in the decking. Standing requires careful attention to the low ceiling above, the beams that force you to remain perpetually hunched. Your spine has adapted to this posture, curved from months of avoiding the overhead obstacles, but the adaptation comes with constant aches that radiate from your lower back up through your shoulders. Around you, other men are going through their own morning rituals of discomfort. One man examines his feet, checking for signs of rot or infection in the perpetually damp environment. Another works his fingers, trying to restore circulation to hands that have been gripping rope and tools for so long that they've almost forgotten how to relax. The air moves sluggishly around you, stirred only by the motion of bodies and the gentle swaying of the ship. It carries the accumulated odors of men who haven't bathed in months, of wet wood slowly rotting, of bilge water that sloshes back and forth in the lowest part of the hull. You breathe it because you have no choice, but each breath reminds you of how far you are from any place that might be called clean. You reach for your small collection of possessions, checking to make sure everything is still there. The spare shirt that's no cleaner than the one you're wearing. The piece of sailcloth that serves as a blanket when the nights grow cold. The wooden spoon that represents the height of your dining luxury. And hidden at the bottom, wrapped carefully in oiled canvas, the small knife that serves as both tool and symbol of whatever independence you still possess. The knife is important not for its potential as a weapon, but for the small measures of control it provides. With it, you can trim your fingernails when they become long enough to catch on things and tear. You can cut away sections of rotting cloth before they spread to the rest of your clothing. You can carve small marks in the wood, keeping track of days that otherwise blur together into an endless succession of identical experiences. Someone above shouts an order, and you know your brief moment of quiet contemplation is over. The day watch is beginning, and every man is expected to contribute his share to keeping this collection of wood and rope and canvas moving through the water. You stuff your possessions back into their bag and prepare to face another day of the same grinding routine. But first, you pause and listen to the sounds that surround you. The constant creaking of the ship's structure as it works through the swells, the whisper of water moving along the hull, the breathing and small movements of your crewmates. These sounds have become the background music of your existence, as familiar as your own heartbeat and just as persistent. The ladder leading to the upper deck stretches above you, its rungs worn smooth by the passage of countless feet over months or years of use. Each rung is stained with salt and grime, and you can feel the texture of the wood under your hands, never quite dry, always slightly tacky with accumulated moisture and whatever substances have been transferred from the hands and feet of previous climbers. You place your foot on the bottom rung and feel it give slightly under your weight. The wood has been softened by constant exposure to moisture, and you can hear it creak in a way that speaks of material being stressed beyond its original design parameters. But it holds, as it has held for countless other climbers, and you begin your ascent toward whatever the day will bring. As you climb, you can feel the temperature beginning to change, the stifling heat and humidity of the lower deck giving way to something that might generously be called fresh air. But even the air on deck carries its own burdens: the salt tang of the sea, the smell of wet rope and tar, the underlying odor of men working in close quarters without adequate facilities for washing. Your head emerges through the hatch, and you're immediately struck by the change in light. After the near darkness below, even the gray light of early morning seems almost overwhelming. You squint and blink, your eyes watering as they attempt to adjust to the brightness. The transition is always difficult, requiring several minutes before you can see clearly enough to move safely around the deck. The deck stretches out before you, a familiar landscape of weathered planking and coiled rope, of rigging that rises into the morning sky like a complex web designed by some mad spider. But you know this web intimately now, every line and block and belaying pin. You know which ropes are strong and which are beginning to fray, which sections of decking are solid and which give slightly underfoot. You pull yourself fully onto the deck and stand upright for the first time since yesterday, feeling your spine extend and your shoulders straighten. The sensation is almost luxurious after the cramped conditions below, but you know it's temporary. Within minutes, you'll be bent over some task or another, your back curved in the familiar posture of constant labor. The morning air moves around you, carrying with it the endless moisture of the sea. Everything is damp here, perpetually damp. The ropes feel tacky under your hands. The deck is slick with condensation and spray. Your clothes never quite dry out before they're soaked again by spray or sweat or the simple humidity that pervades everything at sea. You look around at your crewmates as they emerge from below, each one bearing the unmistakable marks of this life. Skin burned dark by the sun and crusted with salt until it has the texture of old leather. Hair that's been bleached and dried by the elements, often matted with salt and whatever oils their scalps still produce. Clothes that hang loosely on frames grown thin from inadequate food and constant labor. Their movements are careful and economical, each gesture considered for its energy cost and potential consequences. Men learn quickly out here that wasted motion can mean the difference between having enough strength for the day's work and falling behind in ways that could prove dangerous. Every action is calculated, every step planned, every movement designed to conserve whatever energy their poor diet provides. The ship rocks gently beneath your feet, the familiar motion that has become so much a part of your existence that you barely notice it consciously. But your body notices, constantly making tiny adjustments to maintain balance, to compensate for the deck that tilts and rolls with each passing wave. It's exhausting in a way that's hard to describe, this constant low-level effort required just to remain upright. Above you, the rigging stretches up into the morning sky, a complex network of ropes and cables that supports the sails and allows the ship to harness whatever wind is available. But from your perspective on deck, it looks more like a trap than a tool, a maze of lines that could easily snare an unwary sailor and drag him to injury or death. The sails themselves hang from the yards like great sheets of patched canvas, their surfaces telling the story of countless repairs and modifications. Some patches are neat and professional, sewn with careful stitches that blend into the original fabric. Others are rough and hasty, emergency repairs made in difficult conditions with whatever materials were available at the time. The first mate appears from the stern cabin, his heavy boots making the deck planks creak and flex under his weight. He's a large man, made larger by the authority he carries, and his presence immediately changes the atmosphere on deck. Conversations that were beginning to form die away. Movements become more purposeful. The casual attitude of men barely awake is replaced by the focused attention of men who know they're being watched. He calls out the first orders of the day, his voice carrying easily over the sound of wind and rigging. The words are familiar, part of the routine that governs every morning, but they still carry the weight of authority and the implicit threat that comes with disobedience in this isolated environment where there's no higher court of appeal. You move toward your assigned station, feeling the rough planking beneath your bare feet. Shoes are a luxury that few can afford out here, and even if you had them, they would quickly rot away in the constant dampness. So you go barefoot, feeling every splinter and irregularity in the deck, every nail head that protrudes slightly above the surface. Your feet have adapted to this harsh environment, growing thick calluses that protect against the worst of the rough surfaces. But they're also vulnerable in ways that shoes would prevent: cuts from sharp edges, splinters that work their way deep into the flesh, infections that can develop in the warm, moist environment that your feet never escape. The morning routine begins with the familiar task of checking the rigging, examining every line and fitting for signs of wear or damage that might have developed during the night. The ropes are your lifelines out here, the only means of controlling the massive forces that drive the ship through the water. But rope is organic, subject to the same processes of decay that affect everything else in this environment. You run your hands along a thick hemp line, feeling for the subtle changes in texture that indicate developing problems. The rope should feel firm and consistent, but age and exposure to salt water cause the fibers to weaken and separate. You're looking for soft spots where the internal structure is beginning to fail, fuzzy areas where the outer covering is wearing away to expose the inner strands. The work is methodical and requires attention, but it's also mindless in a way that allows your thoughts to drift. Your hands know what to feel for, your eyes know what to look for, the knowledge built through months of repetition and the occasional harsh lesson when problems were missed and equipment failed under load. As you work, you become aware of the sounds around you. The constant creaking of the ship's structure as it works through the morning swells. The snap and flutter of canvas as the sails adjust to subtle changes in wind direction. The splash of water against the hull as the bow cuts through each wave. These sounds have become the soundtrack of your existence, as familiar as breathing and just as constant. But they also carry information for those who know how to interpret them. Different creaks mean different things. The normal working of wood under stress, the strain of rigging under load, the more urgent sounds that indicate something is wrong and needs immediate attention. The rigging sings in the wind, each line producing its own note as air passes around it. Together, they create a complex harmony that changes with every shift in wind speed or direction. You've learned to read this music, to recognize when the pattern changes in ways that might indicate developing problems. Above you, blocks and tackles creak as they adjust to changing loads, the wooden housings working against metal fittings that are slowly being corroded by the salt air. Everything metal out here is engaged in a losing battle against rust and corrosion, protected only by whatever oil or grease can be spared from the ship's limited supplies. You move from one section of rigging to another, performing the same careful inspection on each line. The repetition is both comforting and maddening. Comforting because it requires no complex decisions or unfamiliar actions. Maddening because it offers no stimulation or sense of progress beyond the simple completion of another routine task. Your inspection reveals the usual collection of minor problems. A line that's beginning to chafe where it passes through a block, another that shows signs of internal wear, a splice that's working loose under repeated stress. None of these issues is immediately critical, but together they represent the constant deterioration that affects everything exposed to the marine environment. You make mental notes of what you've found, knowing that some problems will be addressed immediately while others will be added to the endless list of maintenance tasks that compete for attention and materials. Resources are limited out here, and decisions about what to fix and what to monitor must be made constantly. The sun climbs higher in the morning sky, and you can feel its heat beginning to penetrate the cool air. Your shirt, already damp with sweat and salt spray, begins to feel heavier as it absorbs more moisture from your body. The fabric is rough against your skin, stiff with accumulated salt that never fully washes out. Your stomach reminds you that you haven't eaten, cramping slightly with the familiar hunger that's become a constant companion. But you know from experience that eating won't necessarily make you feel better. The food available to you is designed for preservation, not nutrition or palatability, and consuming it often leaves you feeling worse than when you started. But eating is necessary for survival, so you make your way to where the morning rations are being distributed. The process is mechanical and efficient, designed to get food into bellies as quickly as possible without any consideration for comfort or satisfaction. The cook stands behind a rough wooden table, ladling out portions with the same indifferent precision he's shown at every meal for months. He's long since given up any pretense that what he's serving could be considered cuisine. His job is to distribute calories, and he performs that function with grim efficiency. Your portion consists of the same elements that make up every meal: a piece of hardtack that could serve as a building material, a strip of salt pork that's more preservation than meat, and a dipper of water that tastes strongly of the wooden barrels where it's stored. You find a place to sit on a coil of rope and examine what passes for your breakfast. The hardtack is the color of old bone, hard enough to chip teeth and about as flavorful. You tap it experimentally against the deck and hear the solid sound of something that's been dried and compressed until it's achieved nearly mineral hardness. The salt pork glistens with grease and crystalline deposits of salt, its surface cured to a leather-like consistency. You can see where the preservation process has drawn out all natural moisture, leaving something that requires serious effort to chew and offers little satisfaction when finally swallowed. You begin the familiar ritual of trying to make the food edible, soaking the hardtack in your water to soften it enough to bite without breaking your teeth. The water immediately takes on a cloudy appearance as the biscuit begins to dissolve, releasing whatever flour and binding agents went into its creation, along with whatever insects or larvae have taken up residence since it was baked. As you wait for the hardtack to achieve some degree of softness, you look around at your crewmates engaged in the same struggle. Some have developed techniques for making the food more palatable, crushing the hardtack into smaller pieces, adding whatever spirits they can obtain to kill the taste and any organisms that might be living in the bread. Others have simply given up on the concept of enjoyment, wolfing down their rations as quickly as possible to get the ordeal over with. They chew mechanically, their faces expressionless, focusing on the necessity of consuming calories rather than any hope of satisfaction or pleasure. The conversations around you are muted and practical, focused on the immediate concerns of the day ahead. No one discusses hopes or dreams anymore. Those topics are too painful, too likely to remind everyone of what they've lost and may never regain. Instead, the talk centers on technical matters, on the small problems and adjustments that might make their current situation marginally more bearable. You bite into your softened hardtack and immediately regret it. Despite the soaking, it retains enough hardness to make your jaws ache, and the taste is flat and stale, with undertones that suggest the flour was already questionable when it was first milled and has only deteriorated with age and exposure. The salt pork is no improvement. The preservation process has driven out all moisture and most flavor, leaving something that requires sustained effort to chew and offers little nutritional reward for the energy expended. You work at it methodically, trying to break it down into pieces small enough to swallow without choking. The water helps wash it all down, but it carries its own collection of unpleasant flavors. The wooden barrels where it's stored impart a musty taste, and you can see small particles floating in the liquid that you prefer not to examine too closely. But dehydration is a constant threat in this environment, so you drink it anyway, trying not to dwell on its quality or origin. As you struggle through your meal, you become aware of the routine developing around you. Men finishing their rations and moving to their assigned tasks for the day, the ship's operation resuming with the mechanical precision that keeps everything functioning despite the harsh conditions. You finish what you can of your breakfast and join the movement toward the day's first major task. The deck needs its daily scrubbing, a ritual that serves more to keep the crew occupied than to achieve any real improvement in cleanliness. The planking is permanently stained with substances that no amount of scrubbing will ever remove, but the work continues anyway. You take your place in the line of men working their way across the deck with brushes and buckets of seawater. The brush in your hands is worn and rough, its bristles flattened by months of use against the hard wood of the deck. The seawater is cold and harsh, and within minutes your hands are red and chapped from the constant immersion. The work is rhythmic and mindless. Dip the brush, scrub a section of planking, move forward, repeat. The motion becomes automatic quickly, allowing your mind to drift while your body continues the familiar routine. But where can your thoughts go that won't bring pain or despair? The past is full of losses, the future seems impossible to imagine, leaving only the immediate present with its constant discomforts and small irritations. You focus on the physical sensations. The rough texture of the brush against your palms, the cold bite of the seawater as it splashes onto your clothes, the ache in your back as you bend over the work. These sensations are unpleasant but manageable, preferable to the deeper pains that come from thinking too much about your situation. The scrubbing reveals the deck's true condition, the permanent stains and scars that tell the story of this ship's long and difficult service. Dark patches where blood has soaked into the wood grain, grooves worn by the dragging of heavy objects, areas where the planking has been patched and repatched, creating a patchwork surface that speaks of continuous repair and maintenance. You scrub at these stains knowing they'll never come clean, but scrubbing anyway because that's what's expected. The futility of the effort is somehow representative of everything about this life. Constant work that accomplishes little, endless repetition of tasks that serve no purpose beyond keeping everyone busy and under control. The sun climbs higher, and you can feel its heat building on your back and shoulders. The combination of physical labor and solar radiation begins to take its toll, drawing moisture from your body faster than you can replace it. Your shirt clings to your skin, heavy with sweat and salt spray, the fabric growing rougher as salt crystals form and redissolve with each cycle of dampening and partial drying. The morning progresses with mechanical regularity, each task flowing into the next without pause or variation. You move from scrubbing the deck to checking rigging, from rigging to sail maintenance, from sail maintenance to the countless small repairs that keep a wooden ship functional in an environment that wants to destroy it. Each task requires attention but not thought, concentration but not engagement. Your hands know what to do, your eyes know what to look for, but your mind remains largely unoccupied, free to notice the small discomforts and irritations that make up so much of your daily experience. You work on a section of rigging that shows signs of chafe, wrapping the vulnerable area with strips of canvas to protect it from further wear. The work requires careful attention to detail. The wrapping must be tight enough to stay in place but not so tight as to restrict the rope's movement through blocks and fairleads. As you work, you become aware of the conversations around you, the muted discussions that pass for social interaction in this isolated environment. The talk is practical and immediate, focused on technical problems and their solutions. There's no energy or inclination for broader discussions about life or philosophy or the future. The men around you move with the careful economy of motion that comes from months of working in cramped conditions with limited energy reserves. Every gesture is considered, every movement planned to achieve maximum efficiency with minimum effort. It's an adaptation to an environment where wasted motion can mean the difference between completing necessary tasks and falling behind in dangerous ways. Your stomach reminds you again that it's empty, cramping with the familiar hunger that's become a constant backdrop to everything you do. But you know the next meal is hours away, and when it comes, it will be identical to the last one. The same unappetizing combination of hardtack and salt pork that provides just enough calories to keep you functioning. The work continues with relentless regularity, one task flowing into another without pause for rest or contemplation. You move from rigging maintenance to deck work, from deck work to equipment inspection, performing each job with the mechanical precision that's become second nature after months of repetition. You find yourself assigned to checking the ship's pumps, the mechanisms that remove the water that constantly seeps through the hull. This is critical work. A failed pump could mean the difference between staying afloat and sinking slowly beneath the waves. But it's also routine work, requiring methodical attention rather than creative problem solving. The pumps are simple but effective, designed to move large volumes of water with minimal maintenance. But like everything else on the ship, they're subject to the constant deterioration that affects all mechanical systems exposed to salt water and heavy use. The leather seals shrink and crack, the wooden components swell and warp, the metal fittings corrode despite whatever protection can be provided. You work methodically through the inspection process, checking each component for signs of wear or damage. The work requires you to crawl into cramped spaces below deck, areas where the air is even more stagnant and oppressive than in the sleeping quarters. The smell of bilge water is overwhelming here, a combination of seawater, rotting organic matter, and the various substances that have leaked or been spilled into the ship's lowest spaces. The bilge water itself is a constant presence, sloshing back and forth with the ship's motion, creating sounds that range from gentle whispers to more urgent gurgles when the volume increases. You listen to these sounds as you work, interpreting their meaning with the skill that comes from months of experience with the ship's various moods and conditions. The pump components show the expected signs of wear: leather that's beginning to crack, wood that's softening from constant moisture exposure, metal that's developing the brown stains of early corrosion. None of these problems is immediately critical, but together they represent the gradual degradation that affects every system on the ship. You make the adjustments and minor repairs that are possible with the tools and materials available, knowing that more comprehensive maintenance will have to wait for times when better resources can be obtained. It's always a balance between immediate needs and long-term requirements, between using limited supplies now and saving them for potentially more critical situations later. The work in the bilge areas leaves you soaked with sweat and covered with the grime that accumulates in the ship's lowest spaces. Your clothes, already damp and salt-stained, pick up additional layers of dirt and moisture that make them even more uncomfortable against your skin. But changing clothes isn't an option. Your spare shirt is in no better condition than the one you're wearing. You climb back to the upper deck feeling the relief that comes from escaping the oppressive atmosphere below. The air on deck, while far from fresh, seems almost clean compared to the stagnant environment you've just left. You take several deep breaths, trying to clear your lungs of the heavy, humid air that fills the ship's interior spaces. The sun is now high enough to create serious heat, and you can feel it pressing down on your back and shoulders. The wooden deck is warming under the solar radiation, creating updrafts that carry the smell of tar and hot wood. Your bare feet begin to feel the heat transfer from the planking, adding another layer of discomfort to your already challenging environment. You move to the next assigned task, joining a group of men working on sail maintenance. The canvas needs constant attention, patches sewn over tiers, worn areas reinforced before they become holes, edges re-hemmed where the stitching has worked loose. It's detailed work that requires good light and steady hands, but it's also work that can be done sitting down, providing a brief respite from the constant standing and bending that characterizes most shipboard labor. The sail spreads across a section of deck like a giant piece of canvas artwork, its surface telling the story of countless encounters with wind and weather. Some patches are neat and professional, applied with careful stitches that distribute stress evenly across the repair. Others are rough and hasty, emergency fixes applied in difficult conditions when keeping the sail functional was more important than maintaining its appearance. You settle into position with needle and thread, beginning the slow process of reinforcing a section where the canvas is showing signs of wear. The needle is thick and sharp, designed to penetrate the heavy sailcloth, but it still requires effort to push through the multiple layers of material. Your fingers, already rough and calloused from rope work, develop new soreness from the constant pressure of the needle's eye. The thread is hemp, like most of the ship's cordage, strong enough to withstand the enormous stresses that sails experience but coarse enough to be difficult to work with. Each stitch must be placed carefully, with consideration for how the forces will distribute when the sail is under load. Poor stitching can lead to catastrophic failure at critical moments. As you work, you listen to the conversations around you. The men engaged in sail repair tend to be some of the more skilled aboard, and their talk often centers on technical matters. The best techniques for different types of repairs, observations about how various patches have held up over time, speculation about how long various sections of sail will last before requiring replacement. But even these technical discussions are subdued, lacking the energy and enthusiasm that such conversations might have in other circumstances. Everyone is tired, worn down by the constant demands of keeping the ship functional and themselves alive. There's little energy left for animated discussion or debate. The work continues through the morning hours, the sun climbing higher and the heat building on the deck. Your position gives you a good view of the ocean around the ship, the endless expanse of water that stretches to the horizon in every direction. The sea is relatively calm today, with long, gentle swells that rock the ship in a rhythm that's become as familiar as breathing. But you know how quickly conditions can change. The same ocean that appears so benign can transform within hours into a violent, ship-destroying force. You've experienced enough rough weather to know that this calm is temporary, that somewhere beyond the horizon conditions are developing that could test the ship and crew beyond their limits. You return your attention to the needlework, focusing on the immediate task rather than the larger uncertainties that define your situation. The stitching requires concentration, each placement of the needle requiring consideration of how it will affect the overall strength and flexibility of the repair. It's satisfying work in a way, providing a sense of progress and accomplishment that many shipboard tasks lack. But it's also slow work, and you know that this single patch will require hours to complete properly. The sail contains dozens of such repairs, each representing hours of careful labor, and new damage is constantly being created by the normal operation of the ship. It's another example of the endless battle against deterioration that defines life at sea. Your back begins to ache from the hunched position required for the detailed work, and you shift periodically to relieve the strain. But there's no really comfortable position for extended needlework on a ship's deck, and you know that by the end of the task your entire body will be stiff and sore from maintaining unnatural postures for hours at a time. The midday sun reaches its peak intensity, and the heat on deck becomes almost unbearable. The wooden planking is hot enough to burn bare feet, and the metal fittings scattered around the deck become too hot to touch without protection. The tar in the deck seams softens and begins to give off vapors that add to the already oppressive atmosphere. You seek what shade you can find, positioning yourself in the shadow cast by the rigging or sails, but the relief is minimal and temporary. The sun moves constantly across the sky, and shadows shift with it, providing only brief respites from the direct radiation. Most of the deck remains fully exposed, baking under the relentless heat. Your water breaks become more frequent as dehydration becomes a serious concern. But the water available provides little relief, warm, stale, and carrying the taste of whatever organisms have taken up residence in the storage barrels. You drink it anyway because the alternative is heat exhaustion or worse, but each swallow reminds you of how far you are from any source of clean, fresh water. The sail repair work continues despite the heat, because the need for functional canvas doesn't pause for weather conditions. You work more slowly now, taking frequent breaks to wipe sweat from your eyes and hands, but the stitching must continue. Each completed section represents increased reliability for the ship's propulsion system, potentially meaning the difference between reaching safety and being left helpless in dangerous waters. As the afternoon progresses, you notice changes in the wind patterns around the ship. The air movement becomes more erratic, with gusts that fill the sails suddenly followed by periods of relative calm. These changes require constant adjustment of the rigging, keeping several crew members busy with the endless task of sail trimming. You watch these adjustments while continuing your needlework, noting how the ship's behavior changes with each modification to the sail configuration. Speed increases and decreases, the motion through the water becomes more or less efficient, the stress on various components of the rigging shifts as loads redistribute. It's a complex dance between wind, sail, and ship, requiring constant attention and adjustment. The men working the rigging move with practiced efficiency, their hands finding the right lines without conscious thought, their bodies automatically adjusting to the changing angles and forces. But you can see the fatigue in their movements, the cumulative effect of months of this demanding labor. The afternoon heat continues to build, making every task more difficult and exhausting. Sweat runs constantly down your face and body, stinging in the small cuts and abrasions that cover your hands and arms. Your clothes are soaked through, clinging to your skin with an oppressive heaviness that makes every movement more difficult. You take another break from the needlework to seek relief in whatever shade is available, but even the shaded areas offer little comfort. The air temperature is high enough that there's no real cooling effect, and the humidity makes it difficult for sweat to evaporate effectively. Your body's cooling system is overwhelmed by the conditions, leaving you feeling overheated and exhausted. Looking around at your crewmates, you see the same effects of the heat written on every face. Skin flushed red from the combination of sun exposure and elevated body temperature, eyes squinted against the glare reflecting off the water, movements slowed by the effort required to function in such oppressive conditions. But the work continues because it must. Ships don't maintain themselves, and the ocean doesn't care about human comfort. Every task that's postponed due to heat or fatigue becomes more urgent as time passes, creating a backlog of maintenance that could eventually prove dangerous if not addressed. You return to the sail repair, knowing that the work must be completed regardless of the conditions. The stitching continues, each placement of the needle requiring more effort as your hands become slippery with sweat and your concentration wavers in the heat. But gradually, the patch takes shape, the new canvas integrating with the old to create a repair that should withstand the stresses of normal operation. The completion of one patch simply reveals the next area that needs attention, and you move to a new section of the sail where wear patterns indicate developing weakness. The work is endless, like so many tasks aboard ship, with each completed job simply making room for the next one in an infinite queue of necessary maintenance. But there's also satisfaction in the work, a sense of contributing to the ship's continued operation and the crew's survival. Each properly executed repair increases the reliability of critical systems, potentially making the difference between success and disaster in future challenging conditions. As the afternoon wears on, the heat begins to affect not just comfort but performance. Your stitching becomes less precise as fatigue and dehydration take their toll, and you find yourself making mistakes that require careful correction. The simple act of threading the needle becomes more difficult as your hands shake slightly from the stress of working in extreme conditions. Other crew members show similar signs of heat-related deterioration. Movements become slower and less coordinated. Conversation dies away as everyone conserves energy for essential tasks, and the overall efficiency of the ship's operation decreases as human performance degrades. But still the work continues, because stopping isn't an option. The ocean doesn't pause for human limitations, and the ship's needs don't adjust for crew comfort. Every system must continue to function, every necessary task must be completed, regardless of the conditions that make those tasks increasingly difficult to perform. The afternoon sun finally begins its descent toward the western horizon, and you can sense the collective relief among the crew as the promise of eventual cooling becomes real. The heat remains intense, but psychologically there's comfort in knowing that the worst of the day's temperature is behind you. You complete another section of sail repair and pause to examine your work. The stitching is adequate but not perfect, showing the effects of fatigue and difficult working conditions. In better circumstances, you might redo some of the less precise work, but out here adequate is often the best that can be achieved given the constraints of time, materials, and human endurance. The sail repairs represent hours of careful labor, but they're only a small part of the canvas maintenance that the ship requires. Other sections need attention, other patches need reinforcement, other areas show signs of developing problems. You move to a new spot on the sail, where the canvas has begun to fray along a seam, the threads pulling apart under the constant strain of wind and weather. The needle in your hand feels heavier now, your fingers stiff from hours of repetitive motion. Each stitch requires more effort than the last, your hands cramping as you force the thick hemp thread through the resistant fabric. The sail is coarse under your fingertips, its surface roughened by salt and sun, and you can feel small grains of dried salt breaking free as you work, falling onto the deck below like tiny flakes of snow. The heat of the afternoon presses against you, a physical weight that seems to settle into your bones. Your shirt, soaked through with sweat and spray, clings to your back, the fabric chafing against your skin with every movement. You pause to wipe your forehead, and the sweat stings your eyes, mixing with the salt that's always present on your skin. The deck beneath you radiates heat, the wooden planks warm against your bare feet, and you shift your weight to avoid the spots where the tar between the boards has softened into a sticky mess. Around you, the other men continue their own tasks, their movements slow but deliberate, each one conserving energy in the oppressive heat. The air is thick with the smell of tar and hot wood, mingled with the ever-present tang of salt and the faint, sour odor of unwashed bodies. You can hear the labored breathing of a man nearby, his lungs struggling with the humid air and the accumulated effects of months at sea. Another man coughs, a deep, wet sound that carries across the deck, a reminder of how easily illness can spread in these cramped conditions. You return to your stitching, focusing on the rhythm of the needle moving in and out of the canvas. The task is repetitive, almost hypnotic, and for a moment, your mind drifts to thoughts of what life might have been like before this ship, before this endless cycle of labor and discomfort. But those thoughts are dangerous, pulling at memories that feel like they belong to someone else. You push them away and focus instead on the texture of the sail, the way the hemp thread catches slightly as you pull it through, the faint creak of the needle as it pierces the fabric. The wind shifts again, a subtle change that you feel more than hear. The sails above you adjust to the new direction, their canvas snapping softly as they fill with air. The ship responds, its motion through the water changing slightly, the deck tilting just enough to make you adjust your balance. You've grown so accustomed to these shifts that your body compensates without conscious thought, but each adjustment adds to the low-level fatigue that never truly leaves you. A shout from the mate breaks your concentration, calling for a group of men to adjust the rigging to account for the wind change. You're not part of that group, so you continue your work, but you can hear the sounds of their labor. The creak of rope under tension, the thump of feet on the deck, the occasional grunt of effort as they haul on the lines. The ship is a living thing in its own way, always demanding attention, always requiring the collective effort of its crew to keep it moving forward. Your fingers slip on the needle, and you feel a sharp prick as it grazes your thumb. A small bead of blood wells up, mixing with the sweat and salt on your skin. You pause to wipe it away, knowing that even a minor injury can become a problem in this environment, where cleanliness is impossible and infection is a constant threat. You inspect the cut, small but stinging, and decide it's not worth reporting. You've seen men disciplined for less, accused of shirking work over minor complaints, and you can't afford the attention. The sail repair continues, stitch by careful stitch, until you complete the section you've been working on. You lean back slightly, feeling the ache in your shoulders and neck from hours spent hunched over the canvas. The patch is serviceable, not perfect, but it will hold for now, adding a little more life to a sail that's already a patchwork of repairs. You look at the expanse of canvas stretched across the deck and see countless other areas that need attention, a never-ending list of tasks that will outlast your strength and patience. The mate calls for the sail to be moved, and you join the group of men who carefully fold and shift the heavy canvas to expose a new section for repair. The sail is unwieldy, its weight surprising even after months of handling it. Your arms strain as you help maneuver it into place, the rough fabric scraping against your palms, leaving them raw and stinging. The effort leaves you breathing heavily, your chest tight with the humid air and the exertion of moving something so large in such oppressive heat. With the sail repositioned, you settle back into your spot and begin working on another frayed seam. The needle feels even heavier now, your fingers less responsive as fatigue settles deeper into your muscles. The heat is unrelenting, the sun beating down on the deck with no clouds to offer relief. You can feel the sweat running down your back, pooling at the base of your spine, soaking into the waistband of your trousers. The sounds of the ship continue around you, a constant background that you've learned to filter but never fully ignore. The creak of the masts as they flex under the weight of the sails, the groan of the hull as it pushes through each wave, the faint whistle of wind through the rigging. These sounds are as much a part of you now as your own heartbeat, a reminder of the fragile balance that keeps this wooden world afloat. You glance up at the horizon, an unbroken line of water in every direction. The sight is both beautiful and oppressive, a reminder of how small you are, how isolated this ship is from any other form of life. There's no land in sight, no other ships, no birds or fish to break the monotony of the sea. Just water, endless water, stretching out to meet the sky in a haze of heat and humidity. Your thoughts drift to the stories you heard before you ended up here, tales of pirate life filled with treasure and adventure, of daring raids and exotic ports. Those stories seem like cruel jokes now, mocking the reality of your existence. There's no treasure here, no adventure, just the endless grind of keeping a decaying ship functional, of surviving one more day in an environment that seems designed to break you. The afternoon wears on, and the heat begins to sap what little energy you have left. Your movements grow slower, your stitches less precise, and you find yourself pausing more frequently to wipe sweat from your eyes or shake out the cramps in your hands. The other men around you show similar signs of exhaustion, their faces drawn, their eyes half closed against the glare of the sun. The mate notices the slowing pace and barks out an order to pick up the speed. His voice is sharp, cutting through the haze of heat and fatigue, and you force yourself to move faster, to push through the discomfort. You know better than to draw his attention for too long. Discipline on this ship is swift and unforgiving, and you've seen men flogged for less than a moment's hesitation. You focus on the task at hand, trying to lose yourself in the rhythm of the needle and thread. The sail is rough under your fingers, the hemp thread coarse and resistant, but the repetition is almost soothing in its predictability. Stitch after stitch, you reinforce the seam, each loop of thread adding a tiny measure of strength to a system that's constantly under stress. The sun continues its slow arc across the sky, and you can feel the subtle shift as the heat begins to lessen, the afternoon giving way to the promise of evening. The shadows lengthen across the deck, offering small patches of relief from the relentless sun. You move into one of these shadows, feeling the slight cooling effect on your skin, though the air remains heavy with humidity. The sail repair group begins to disperse as men are called to other tasks, and you're reassigned to checking the ship's water barrels, a task that's both critical and deeply unpleasant. The barrels are stored below deck, in the same stifling hold where you sleep, and the thought of returning to that cramped, humid space fills you with dread. You descend the ladder carefully, feeling the familiar creak of the rungs under your weight. The air below deck is noticeably warmer, thick with the smells of wet wood, stagnant water, and the accumulated grime of months at sea. Your eyes take a moment to adjust to the dim light, the only illumination coming from a few lanterns hung from the beams, their flames flickering in the sluggish air. The water barrels are lined up along one side of the hold, their wooden surfaces swollen from constant exposure to moisture. You move from one to the next, checking for signs of leaks or contamination. The barrels are heavy and unwieldy, and shifting them to inspect the seams requires effort that leaves you sweating even more profusely in the already oppressive heat. The water inside the barrels is far from clean, its surface cloudy with algae and other growths that thrive in the warm, stagnant environment. You dip a finger into one barrel and taste the water, wincing at the familiar bitterness that comes from wood and whatever organisms have taken up residence. It's barely potable, but it's all you have, and rationing means you can't afford to waste a drop. You check the bung on each barrel, ensuring it's secure and not leaking. The wood around the bungs is often soft and swollen, making it difficult to tell if the seal is tight. You press your ear to the side of one barrel, listening for the faint drip that might indicate a leak, but all you hear is the slosh of water moving with the ship's motion and the distant creak of the hull. The task is tedious and uncomfortable, requiring you to crouch in the low-ceilinged hold, your back aching from the unnatural posture. The air is so thick it feels like you're breathing through a wet cloth, and each breath carries the heavy odors of the ship's interior. You can feel sweat dripping down your face, mixing with the grime that coats everything down here, creating a sticky film on your skin. You finish checking the barrels and make a mental note of one that seems to be developing a slow leak. It's not urgent enough to require immediate attention, but it will need to be addressed soon. Another item on the endless list of maintenance tasks that keep the ship and its crew alive. You climb back to the deck, grateful to escape the hold's oppressive atmosphere, though the air above is only marginally better. The sun is lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that might be beautiful if you had the energy to appreciate them. The deck is still warm under your feet, but the worst of the heat is fading, replaced by a growing coolness that carries its own discomforts. Your damp clothes begin to feel clammy against your skin, and you know that the night will bring a chill that will make the humidity even more unpleasant. The evening meal call comes, and you join the line of men waiting for their rations. The process is as familiar as breathing, a ritual that marks the transition from day to night. The cook distributes the same unappetizing food you've had at every meal: hardtack, salt pork, and water that tastes of the barrels it's stored in. There's no variety, no change, just the same meager sustenance that keeps you alive but never satisfied. You take your portion and find a spot to sit, settling onto a coil of rope near the rail. The hardtack is as unappealing as ever, its surface pocked with small holes that suggest the presence of weevils. You tap it against the deck, hoping to dislodge any insects before soaking it in your water to make it soft enough to chew. The salt pork is tough and greasy, requiring careful cutting with your knife to break it into manageable pieces. As you eat, you watch the last of the daylight fade from the sky, the horizon glowing briefly before darkness begins to settle over the ship. The sounds of the evening are different from those of the day. The rigging creaks more softly in the cooler air. The waves seem to slap against the hull with less urgency. The voices of your crewmates grow quieter as fatigue settles over everyone. The meal is a mechanical process, performed more out of necessity than desire. You chew the softened hardtack, feeling it break apart into a gritty paste that clings to your teeth. The salt pork is barely better, its texture leathery and its taste dominated by the salt used to preserve it. You swallow each bite with effort, washing it down with water that tastes of wood and stagnation. Around you, other men eat in silence, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of lanterns hung from the rigging. The light casts long shadows across the deck, creating patterns that shift with the ship's motion. You can see the exhaustion in their postures, the way they slump over their meager meals, their movements slow and deliberate as they conserve what little energy they have left. The conversation is sparse, limited to the occasional comment about the day's work or the condition of the ship. No one speaks of home or the future, those topics too heavy with longing and uncertainty. Instead, the talk is practical, focused on the immediate, how the sails perform today, whether the pumps are keeping up with the bilge water, what repairs need to be prioritized tomorrow. You finish your meal and set the wooden bowl aside, feeling the familiar heaviness in your stomach that comes from eating food that's more about survival than nourishment. The deck beneath you is cooling now, the warmth of the day giving way to the damp chill of night. Your clothes, still wet with sweat and spray, begin to feel cold against your skin, and you know that sleep will be uncomfortable despite your exhaustion. The evening tasks begin, the final round of maintenance and preparation before the night watch takes over. You're assigned to securing loose items on deck, a task that's critical to prevent equipment from shifting during the night's motion. You move from one area to another, checking ropes and tools, ensuring everything is lashed down tightly to withstand the ship's constant movement. The work is straightforward but requires attention, as a single loose line or unsecured tool could become a hazard in the dark. You move carefully, feeling the deck's texture under your feet, avoiding the spots where the planking is uneven or where nails protrude slightly above the surface. The lanterns provide just enough light to work by, their flickering flames creating a dance of shadows that makes every movement feel slightly uncertain. As you secure a coil of rope, you feel the ship's motion change subtly, a slight increase in the roll that suggests a shift in the sea state. You glance at the horizon, now invisible in the growing darkness, and wonder what conditions the night will bring. The sea is unpredictable, capable of turning from calm to chaos with little warning, and every sailor learns to respect its power. The task of securing the deck takes longer than expected, as it always does. There's always one more line to check, one more fitting to tighten, one more potential hazard to address. By the time you finish, the last traces of daylight are gone, and the ship is fully enveloped in the darkness of a moonless night. The stars overhead are brilliant, their light unmarred by any land-based illumination. They form patterns that you've come to recognize, a map of the sky that serves as both navigation aid and reminder of your isolation. You pause for a moment to look up, feeling the vastness of the universe pressing down on you, a reminder of how small this ship is, how fragile your existence in the face of the endless sea. The mate calls for the night watch to take their positions, and you're relieved to find that you're not among them tonight. Your body aches with the accumulated fatigue of the day, and the thought of your hammock, uncomfortable as it is, feels like a promise of relief. You make your way toward the hatch, moving carefully in the dim light, your hands finding the familiar rungs of the ladder. Descending into the hold feels like entering another world, one of stifling heat and oppressive darkness. The air is thick with the smells you've come to know so well, wet wood, unwashed bodies, the sour tang of bilge water. The lanterns here are fewer, their light barely penetrating the gloom, and you navigate by feel as much as by sight, your hands brushing against the rough beams and damp canvas of hammocks. You find your own hammock and ease yourself into it, feeling the coarse rope and canvas conform to your body. The ship's motion is more pronounced down here, each roll amplified by the low position in the hull. The hammock sways gently, the ropes creaking softly with each movement, a sound that blends with the other noises of the hold. The breathing of sleeping men, the occasional cough or muttered curse, the distant slosh of bilge water. Your clothes are still damp, clinging to your skin with a clammy chill that makes you shiver despite the warmth of the hold. You pull your piece of sailcloth over you, its rough texture offering little warmth but some protection against the pervasive dampness. The fabric smells of salt and mildew, a reminder of the environment that surrounds you, but it's better than nothing. You close your eyes and try to relax, to let the ship's motion and the familiar sounds lull you toward sleep. Your body is exhausted, your muscles aching from the day's labor, but your mind is slower to settle. Thoughts of the day's work, the endless tasks that await tomorrow, the uncertainty of what lies ahead, they all linger at the edges of your consciousness, making true rest elusive. The sounds of the ship continue around you, a constant symphony of creaks and groans, of water moving against the hull, of the rigging singing in the night wind. These sounds have become the backdrop of your existence, as familiar as your own breathing, but they also carry a reminder of the fragility of this floating world. Every creak could signal a problem, every groan a potential failure, every splash a warning of the sea's power. You shift in your hammock, trying to find a position that eases the ache in your back, but the canvas and rope offer little comfort. The dampness of your clothes seeps into your skin, and you can feel the salt crystals forming where the fabric rubs against you. Your scalp itches, a reminder of the lice that have taken up residence, and you resist the urge to scratch, knowing it will only make things worse. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by the ship's motion and the sounds of men around you. Someone coughs nearby, a deep, rattling sound that speaks of illness that's taken root in lungs weakened by poor nutrition and constant damp. Another man shifts in his hammock, the ropes creaking loudly in the quiet hold, and you hear the faint murmur of a conversation, too low to make out the words but carrying the tone of exhaustion and resignation. Your dreams, when they come, are filled with the sensations of the ship, the sway of the hammock, the taste of salt in your mouth, the rough texture of rope under your hands. Even in sleep, you can't escape this world, its discomforts and demands woven into the fabric of your unconscious mind. The line between waking and dreaming blurs, and you drift through a twilight state where rest is never complete, never fully restorative. The night stretches on, marked only by the changing sounds of the ship and the occasional call from the deck above as the night watch responds to shifts in the wind or sea. You wake briefly several times, stirred by a particularly loud creak or a change in the ship's motion, your body attuned to the rhythms of this environment even in sleep. Each time you wake, you feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down on you, a reminder of the toll this life takes. Your muscles ache, your skin feels raw from constant exposure to salt and damp, and your stomach clenches with the persistent hunger that no amount of hardtack can satisfy. You try to sink back into sleep, to reclaim a few more moments of rest before the inevitable call to start another day. The hours pass in this half-sleep, and you're vaguely aware of the ship continuing its journey through the dark sea, its wooden structure straining against the forces of wind and water. The stars overhead, invisible from your position in the hold, continue their slow march across the sky, marking the passage of time in a way that feels meaningless in this endless cycle of labor and survival. As the first hints of dawn begin to filter through the hatch above, you feel the familiar stirrings of the crew around you. The sounds of coughing and shifting bodies grow more frequent, the murmurs of conversation more distinct as men prepare to face another day. You lie still for a moment longer, clinging to the last vestiges of rest, knowing that soon you'll have to rise and begin the cycle again. The hammock sways gently beneath you, its ropes creaking softly with each motion of the ship. You can feel the damp canvas against your skin, the salt crystals that have formed in the folds of your clothes, the itch of lice that never fully goes away. These sensations are your world now, as much a part of you as your own breath, your own heartbeat. You listen to the sounds of the ship one last time before rising, the creak of wood, the slap of waves, the faint whistle of wind through the rigging above. They're the sounds of a life that's both relentless and unchanging, a life that grinds away at your body and spirit with every passing hour. And as you prepare to swing your legs over the side of the hammock, to face another day of hardship and repetition, you know with absolute certainty that this is why you wouldn't survive a day as a pirate in 1718. Not because of battles or storms, but because of the slow, relentless toll of a life that offers no comfort, no hope, only the endless struggle to endure.